All right, all right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Debug the Future. I'm your host, Tahem, and as always, we are discussing what's happening not today, but tomorrow and many days in the future. Today, I've got a super special guest with me. I've known Sanil for, I would say, almost our entire lives. He is the founding partner of Huddle, and I would say is at the forefront of the tech and startup scene in India. I'm actually going to let him do his intro, and then we're going to get into just a bunch of really interesting discussions on like what's going on in India and in the startup scene and like a bunch of other things. Over to you.
No, thanks, Tahim. I think this is, we're finally getting our conversations recorded, so I'm going to try and be as proper right now. But it's always good to chat,
Oh no, this is a
especially.
free for all chaos place, so you can say what you want.
Great. I'm just going to get started then. No, but it's great to be here, and I mean, while I'll give a quick introduction to what we do at Huddle, we are an accelerator for consumer startups, for startups in the electric vehicle ecosystem, consumer internet. All in all, we're sector agnostic. That being said, we like building for the future, particularly the future of 2025, be it a SaaS play, be it B2C, B2B. We don't mind as long as it is trying to disrupt a traditional business. It's trying to create something that is long term, and it's definitely trying to service some part of the circular economy, which we can get into in a bit. We accelerate ventures and we invest in them from the early stage onwards, from pre-seed upwards to pre-series A. Trying to be as operational as possible with the team and been building over 45 ventures today in India.
Awesome, thank you. So before we get into more specific stuff, you had mentioned like the consumer of 2025, and like you're looking at that as a time frame. What does that even mean? What is the consumer of 2025? Like what does he, she, they like even like care about, and how are they different to like what's happening today?
I think the consumer of 2025, they definitely have more opinions than those that consumers we know about from the past. And the past could be 5 years from where we are today versus 5 years back. When we look at the consumer in the future, we believe they have three necessities. They need better distribution of whatever their product or their service. The distribution needs to be cost effective, either through being cheaper to the alternatives or giving them a higher ROI of what they want. And third, there has to be some sort of a vanity quotient to it. They need to have wanted this before. And I feel the last point is very important. Whenever we're building products or services, we believe that if you give the consumer something that they had spoken about before, and you give it to them before they speak about it, they're more likely to give you what product market fit's all about. They're probably going to give you the right kind of word of mouth. They're going to make your acquisition even easier. And I believe that's where the consumer of 2025 is going to require necessities. And I think why we look at ourselves building for the 2025 consumer is the period between 2025 to 2030 is very important. And in India, when you look at most of the population going under 35 and under 40, electric vehicles going to be at an all-time high in 2030, at least the estimations say. People drinking, coffees that aren't necessarily Nescafe, but might be a Blue Tokai, and consuming gaming ventures not on a Nintendo but on a mobile phone. I feel everything is about to shift. There's going to be a new mountain that's going to be the real peak, and that's why we're very excited about 25 as our peak.
Interesting. I guess one question which a lot of people have about the consumers right now is a lot of this is also tied to the economic growth of the country, right? Because a lot of these, a lot of the purchasing can only happen if you have enough. How do you guys think about that? Is it that the middle class is becoming larger or the middle class is becoming wealthier? Which one is more important?
It's definitely the fact that they're getting larger, which means you can create more and more cohorts between which part of the expanse you want to take over. I think one area that we keep learning each day while we work with founders is it's about finding it's about finding your your fan base. I mean, it's as simple as that. We have to dumb it down. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important that while the ecosystem of the middle class is getting larger, whether they're getting richer or poorer is not the focus area. It's really the focus area for us, that which cohort do we want to focus towards and why do they want us? And without sounding very macro, I mean, to just give an example of, let's say, snacking as a culture. Snacking is a global phenomenon, but the reason to snack is very different. I think we have to realize that, are they coming to you if you're a snacking brand because they like the fact that you're higher in protein, or are they simply coming because you're a cost alternative for what they used to have? If it's the latter, well, tomorrow you're going to get replaced. But if it's the former, you've just found yourself a cohort that is only going to get larger. And I feel that's what excites us, and which is why we don't essentially look at the wealth of the consumer. We just look at which part of the day we want to build a product for them for. And that's what we like viewing the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a super interesting way of looking at it. I like that, the day part. So this year, Indian startup funding has obviously been out of control in terms of how much has poured into the ecosystem. But D2C has been one of the main recipients of it. I think I was looking at a stat, something like nearly $800 million has already flown in just this year alone. So what's the how are you looking at it? Do you think there's too much money flowing in? Do you think there's still a large piece that needs, what's your opinion just on what's happening right now? And then my follow-up question to that is, what are opportunities that are exciting you right now?
Yeah, so I'll take the second one, completely disjointed to what my thoughts might be right now, because they might actually be counter intuitive to my additional first thought process. I think first and foremost, D2C, we have to recognize that not all D2C is equity worthy, and not all D2C should pick up equity. It can be built out with revenue-based financing, other debt options, working capital. So it's important to figure out, why are we all seeing so much capital? 800 million, as you were mentioning, it's a stat that I've just learned. And I think that's just the start. It'll change by the end of this conversation probably. And I think that's what's exciting about the space. I think what we have to recognize about why D2C is being built out so heavily is because there's been two things that have taken place. One is the habit change that has been created since last year due to, of course, the pandemic, and everyone realizing that they have started consuming. They've started making their own decisions rather than being persuaded by what's on a shelf. They've started, so that's the habit creation. The second element is people have started realizing that they actually do want to subscribe without actually giving a subscription. And it's more so in India, right? You'll have a lot of people with habits but less subscription, which is the second reason why we've got to be very careful about when we pick up equity in a D2C brand. Are we picking it up because they've got unique buyers, and a lot of them, or do they have core buyers? And I'm not trying to play the Scrooge here and say, and trying to say that this is a bubble in any way. We want to be the front runners backing D2C companies. We want to be cognizant of the fact that you rather have 10 core customers then get funded than have 1,000 unique customers and pick up capital to figure out who your 10 are. And I do believe a lot of capital that gets picked up first might be due to the fact that you've just seen a lot of early surge, and now you're trying to really figure out your PMF. Coming to your second point, that's my cynical view. I think the optimistic view and how we're looking at it is, D2C needs to be built out if you have all the infrastructure to back it without capital. And that's what excites us. So today, when we've been investing in building ventures in logistics, looking at warehousing right now, anything in cold chain, it's building the infrastructure that inevitably your startup would need, be it them selling one product or selling 1 million. And I think that's where we want to, for us, D2C is the entire ecosystem, and then the brands in the middle, rather than the brands and then build the ecosystem. That's why we're very confident about it. And I do believe a lot of our colleagues in the ecosystem are going into D2C because they've got the enablers who they've been backing, who we know as the big SaaS players out there, or those that have platforms. I think now coming to your second question, Tahem, where I'm excited, I think is a bit far. It's a bit far in India, I believe. One of them is the alternative nutrition space, and I'm while I don't follow it as a practice as a consumer myself, I do believe that the circular economy does require people to look at more companies like Just Egg in the US or the Jackfruit company in the US that has the ability of creating brands, but also creating some sort of sustainability in the environment. And I think, again, for two reasons. One is the consumer is getting conscious, but the consumer does not, there is a limit and a threshold to the consumer's wallet and their consciousness. So how much, where does philanthropy come in, and where does your real intent to save your bucks and consume what you want to come in? So I think we need to create more optimization for alternative nutrition to pick up. We're very passionate about it. We're trying to build brands both from B2B and B2C there. We've always been passionate about consumer packaged goods as long as those foods are an alternative to medicine. And why we say that is because lifestyles are getting, we're probably the oldest 29, 30-year-olds there are and that's how I always look at it. And that's because of the food we've been consuming. And I'm generalizing here. So we do believe we've got to ensure that people are consuming food that helps them curb diabetes, curb cholesterol, curb all these issues. So food as a medicine, and we're very passionate about alternative medicine, and also the men's and women's and sexual wellness as an ecosystem, because that's a byproduct of your diet as well. So again, it's a loop, and I can go on hours and end, but I'll sort of take a pause here.
Yeah, I think what you said was really interesting, because I think largely the world and most people, even in India, have looked at India as a very price conscious market. But in the last few years, especially all these D2C brands have really shown that Indians are very much like other consumers, but they are also value conscious or health conscious consumers as well. And yeah, obviously there's that, you have to find that fine line of okay, this is how much they're willing to pay. And so when you're talking about the alternative nutrition, you're talking about basically meat replacements and other products, right? That's what you mean. That's super interesting. Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting space to see. Now, let's say I'm going to jump a few steps ahead, but let's say that, obviously now a bunch of companies are coming to you every day, maybe every hour at this point, with the boom that's going on. What do you look for? I'm not saying we can either chat about D2C or just generally, but what matters to you as an investor or as an accelerator? What matters to you that can help you separate one company from the others? And I ask this because obviously every single person has their own framework to look at these things.
Yeah, I'll try and limit this to 3 parameters that we have, and and we have this philosophy internally that just because we're sector agnostic doesn't mean everything should excite us. And why we start with that principle internally as an organization is because when we're evaluating a venture, we have to make sure that we've already written some sort of a thesis out there for it. We have already created infrastructure that we believe this hypothetical founder, before they start, we reach out to them or they reach out to us, we've got the infrastructure that we believe they would require. Because in the early stage, you've got to be 2 steps ahead before the problem arises, and then you have to have enough contingency plans. We believe we need to have this infrastructure for the startups beforehand. Prior to that, that means we have to have some sort of a primary opinion, the experts, and the reason to invest in them pre-written. The second node of, so we evaluate ourselves before we evaluate the venture. The second evaluation is this going to be disrupting a traditional business or something that has been in existence for a while? And if the answer is yes, then it's a long-term play, and it doesn't necessarily have a business model to it, which is something we love. We love businesses that don't have business models, because we believe that you need to get accelerated by going through multiple pivots through us while we pick up the capital, while we invest the capital in you, so that when you get the capital, you're not just trying to graze your knees again, and you move away from whatever your bruises are. And the third parameter, which is the most important one, is why is the founder doing what they're doing? You cannot be building anything in the entrepreneurship ecosystem if you do not believe there's a larger purpose than capital. I know it's easy for us to say all this, but there has to be a larger purpose to your product. And how we evaluate this is by recognizing that if they had all the money in the world and if they had the last penny, how would their philosophy change to the business? And are they willing to let go of the ownership for what they've built? These two, and this only comes with dialogue. It does not come with a simple question. But this is a third parameter that is always an underlying looming analysis that we do.
Interesting. Got it. And I guess one thing that I'm curious to also hear from you is I want to like deep dive into D2C for a few minutes, not only because it's the flavor of the month or the year at this point, but also because it's been a surprising event in India. Like I don't think people expected D2C to happen so quickly, because D2C has just happened in the US in the last few years. So it's, in terms of maturity of markets, it's been an interesting thing. One, why do you think it just happened? Like COVID happened last year, and I mean it's still happening, but like after that accelerated certain industries. Why do you think it accelerated D2C of all things? That's one, I guess, or maybe it's not related to COVID, why like D2C happened. And then I guess the second thing I'm also curious to hear from you is where you see founders tripping up in this space as well. Like, you know, you are, you like right now you spoke a lot about what works and like things like that, but also like what are the common pitfalls that you see founders doing, apart from the fact that like a lot of them are just trying to copy each other, which is the standard one. But yeah, but let's go with the first one. Like why now has this suddenly happened with consumer, like just not even D2C, but consumer? And then like what advice would you give founders since you're seeing so many come to you?
So I think why the consumer ecosystem has been able to scale so rapidly in the last year is because prior to, you know, if we put COVID as that pivotal change in the rise of consumer, prior to that, there were enough and plenty logistics partners out there. There were people who were doing a great job in logistics, warehousing. There were e-commerce ventures out there, of course. You know, all of us consume from these partners. But so you already had the enablers. The missing piece was the intent and the 24/7 intent of the consumer. And that only happened when the consumer was sitting at home. Therefore, the ability to optimize your SEO, the ability to optimize your performance marketing, and the ability to talk to your consumer through content enabled the consumer to get locked in and choose who do they want to try. And why the trial period could work was because the enablers were there. So I think startups had all the support of being able to reach us in whichever part of the country, because that infrastructure was there. They just didn't have the time and the bandwidth to reach out to every person. And I think content has played that game phenomenally. It has helped build trust. It's helped build opinions, fortunately, which gets me to the second point, that what do startups do incorrectly is they do not communicate too much. Again, I believe those that trip up are not communicating, and are communicating more so for transactions and not to understand why a consumer does not come back. I often believe you have to talk to your consumers that have left you, not those consumers that are with you. And I think those that are with you will stick on. They will go through, you know, some sort of plateau, if you may call it. But those that have left you are probably going to be able to give you more information. So actually have, you know, 1 in 14 days, if you want to take that long a gap to go back to your consumers, talk to those that drop off. I feel that's where early stage startups trip up. The second is early stage startups don't, you know, if we want to talk about areas where they trip up, is they don't realize that what you end up making your revenue from typically is your second product. I know I sound very generalistic when I say this. Your first product is about generating revenues, but it's not. It is actually about building the trust. So be sure of having innovation in what you're building. And this could be true for a consumer internet company. This could be true for a consumer packaged good. It could also be true for someone creating simple commodities for home. Just build the trust through either quality, efficiency in terms of delivery, serviceability, pricing. I do not believe should be a reason to build trust ever. Which brings me to the third point, that I don't think anyone should try and compete on price, because, you know, that's like saying who has more bullets in the gun. And I think then comes the fourth period. When we're building something, you have to figure out the same question when a startup asks, why are we doing this? Why are they trusting you? Why are they consuming you? Is it and if they're consuming you, how are they talking about you to the person on the left and right? And I think that speaks volumes. So try and analyze your product market fit basis what your consumer says. And I'll sort of conclude on this point with something that I've heard Tim Ferriss say, because apart from your podcast, I listen to him, and I think these are two people I listen to. It's about always. It's not in this case. I don't think it's about if you have the itch, someone else will have it. I think in consumer, a lot of people think snacking is cool. Let's build it. I don't think cool ever works. So sometimes it's not about your itch. It's about listening to your consumer first.
Awesome. That's super helpful. One, I love the fact that it's me and Tim Ferriss. But anyways, this has been super interesting. Thank you so much. I think both I, as well as whoever's been listening, have learned a lot, not only about what's going on with consumer, but in India, but actually just generally, like a lot of these are very like global principles that can be applied of how to build a consumer first business. Sanil, thanks so much. As always, been amazing.